want you guys to think about this real quick. Out of all the time that you've been around on YouTube watching videos and stuff like that, how often have you heard somebody talk about how good Super Mario World, Banjo-Kazooie, or other games like that from that era, console games from the 90s, the 80s, and the 2000s that people espouse over and over again as being true wonderful games? I want you to think about that real quick, and then I want you to think about how often have you heard either those same people or other people talk about the other greats of those eras that were PC exclusive: XCOM, UFO Defense, Populous, Fallout, Command and Conquer, Age of Empires, StarCraft, Master of Orion. How many of you have actually heard a lot of people talk about these games, which were quite big within the PC sphere in the 90s? Now, you may have heard about Doom or Half-Life. They are kind of the easy, safe PC gaming bets for a lot of creators to talk about. You're watching Rayl Deal Games, and in this video, I'm going to talk about how I think PC exclusive games, especially within the vintage sphere, are severely underappreciated and don't get talked about enough. Now, in the modern era, you're not going to find a lot of videos about, say, Super Mario World, or Super Mario Bros. 3, or even like Killer Instinct, or a lot of these other big games from the 90s and the 80s and such. But you will absolutely come across them more frequently than somebody talking about the insanely amazing 1989 game Populous, or the original two Fallout games. If you find a Fallout video, it's probably going to be about the Bethesda era. And certain genres from this time period never get talked about anymore either, like the RTS. How many just general variety gaming channels talk about RTSs? You know what I mean? It doesn't really happen that often, or 4X games just in general, they're kind of niches. But it is crazy that people who talk about the amazing games of the past never talk about these amazing PC games of the past. The PC games seem to just completely fly under the radar. And it's a shame, because these games are incredibly interesting in their designs and incredibly fun as well. You know, one of the first games I ever played on PC was XCOM UFO Defense. And it's part of the reason that XCOM is one of my favorite gaming franchises. I love XCOM so much. But XCOM UFO Defense provides way more freedom to the player than even XCOM Enemy Unknown and XCOM 2. There's a lot of creative gameplay on display in UFO Defense, such as when you destroy the ground beneath an enemy and they fall multiple stories, they can sometimes die instantly, or the way that terror attacks work and you're trying to manage civvies while also putting down the alien threat, or the way that the objectives for the campaign are a little obscure sometimes. It's a genius game that deserves to be talked about in the same breath as GoldenEye 007 or Final Fantasy VII. And as you guys are seeing on the channel, Fallout 1 and 2, some of my favorite CRPGs ever made, and they basically never get any coverage in the modern era, whereas other RPGs of the time might, like Chrono Trigger, for instance. Now, I know that's a JRPG versus a CRPG, very, very different genres, and that definitely is going to contribute to that for sure. But Fallout 1 and 2 have some genius writing in them. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. And the gameplay is really not bad at all. It's a super fun turn-based system, in my personal opinion, obviously. And it's not the only game that has really, really gameplay dense, rich, and mastery-based progression loops that just doesn't get talked about anymore. And I'm talking about Command and Conquer, Age of Empires, StarCraft, and Warcraft. These are the four pillars of the RTS genre. They're what it's built on, and StarCraft and Age of Empires are pretty much the only reason that the RTS is even around still. And I think there's a couple reasons why it is that a lot of channels throughout the history of YouTube maybe didn't talk about these more than in just passing. And it could be that a lot of people my age, you know, I'm 30, didn't necessarily grow up with a PC that could run these things and maybe didn't come across these experiences as a child. My dad was really into PC gaming in the 90s, and I did get to experience all of these games from a formative age. And yeah, it made me more apt to play them and go out of my way to play them and enjoy them than maybe somebody who only got into PC gaming in the 2000s. And I think it's very, very interesting that not all PC games fall into this purview, though, of being ignored by a lot of YouTube or a lot of video game creators on the platform. Because you can definitely hear people talk about, say, Quake or Doom or Wolf 3D or even Lemmings. I've heard more people talk about Lemmings than any of the games that I've mentioned. And that makes sense because Lemmings was a really, really big deal back in the 90s. But does Lemmings provide more to talk about than, say, Age of Empires 2? You know, it's not a monolith because there's absolutely people on the platform who do talk about these particular games. Spirit of the Law stands out to me as a great Age of Empires 2 creator specifically, but that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about people who have cultivated a niche. I'm talking about just like general variety gaming channels or vintage game channels who don't talk about any of these PC games, and a lot of these games have basically zero coverage on YouTube. Populous, for instance, when I look that up on YouTube, Populous review, I get 5 of the first game, and it's blended in with Populous the Beginning, which is the third game. Whereas if I were to do that with something like, let's say something of comparable size and scope from the same era, Ghosts and Goblins of the NES, Populous sold over 4 million units. The entire Ghosts and Goblins series, the entire franchise, 4.6 million, okay? So the entire franchise of Ghosts and Goblins and the singular Populous game have sold relatively close. I mean, there's a 600,000 difference there, which is not insignificant, but when you're talking about multiple games versus one, I feel like it's not as significant as the number on its own implies. But if I compare those, Ghosts and Goblins NES review, I stopped counting at 15. It's like 3 times as popular since the beginning of YouTube, and some of these videos are like 12 years old, so, you know, obviously they're really, really old, but it's like 3 times as popular, or has historically been, than Populous, which was so way more popular when it came out. And I think it does come down to the fact that a lot of people who maybe did this early kind of reviewing on YouTube just did not play PC games back in the day. And it colored their perspective of what are the true greats. But the whole point of this video is that I think that we need to take a look at these PC greats if we're going to say what is the top 100 games of the 90s or 80s or whatever, and we need to actually put some respect on these old PC exclusives that are just as good as the console exclusives of the time period. And a perfect example of this that I'm talking about here is I looked up IGN's top 100 games of the 90s. Now, this is reader's choice, obviously, so it's not IGN themselves. I don't imagine enough people at the company have played enough 90s games to actually make their own list. Maybe some of them have. I'm sure a lot of the older guys maybe, but a lot of the new ones maybe not. And so there's kind of the audience of IGN bias in the list for sure. That is, that their audience has always been very, very Nintendo biased. So there's that thing to keep in mind. But when you look at that top 100 reader's choice games of the 90s, there are 0 by my count when I flipped through it, and maybe I missed one, but 0 games that started live as PC exclusives. They had one where I at first thought they were going to have one, SimCity, but they very specifically put SimCity Nintendo, so it was very clearly that the port is what people wanted, not SimCity the game as it was in the 80s. And it's exactly what I'm talking about, because I don't really care that it's the IGN list. I care that it's 1.6 million people, or 1.6 million votes, sorry, not people. 1.6 million votes that went into that list, and 0 PC games of that time. And presumably some of those people are very 90s people, because some of the games that were in that top 100 were definitely deep cut 90s stuff for sure. Not necessarily entirely mainstream, but definitely it's clear that people voting were Sega Genesis or SNES kids. And that makes sense given IGN's audience, but where the heck is XCOM UFO Defense? Where the heck is any Command & Conquer game? Where's StarCraft? Where's Age of Empires 2? Which, by the way, out of all the games in that top 100, Age of Empires 2 still getting content to this very day. It is still supported because that's how good Age of Empires 2 is. If you were to look at all of 90s gaming, the only game to still be supported, to my knowledge, maybe there's something else, is Age of Empires 2, and I guess EverQuest. You know, I just thought about EverQuest. It is still supported, I think, but those are like the two games still supported to this very day. These two games, I never hear anyone talk about. And, you know, I kind of get EverQuest. It's an MMO that has a very, very confined audience and has zero chances of growing. But Age of Empires 2 is a little bit different because this is genuinely either the best or at least top 5 RTS games of all time and of an entire genre. Really, really easy to get into. You know, to play high level, just like a fighting game, very difficult to play high level. But to get into and be able to enjoy, Age of Empires 2 is easy as sin. Why is it that we don't hear people talk about PC exclusive games or games that started out PC exclusive more often? It's something that is not really a thing that much anymore. There's not PC exclusive games anymore. Sometimes they're on PC only for like a year and then they go over to console. But it's what I mean is that there's just a whole wealth of vintage games nobody has talked about on this platform, basically, to any level of depth. And it kind of is something that is nice for me as a creator because it means I have a wealth of games I can talk about to extreme depth that nobody has. But it also is very surprising because these games were very financially successful for their era, and then they're just not talked about anymore. So I want to throw it back to you guys. What do you guys think? Do you think PC exclusive games should be talked about more on this platform? Within vintage game circles, obviously, the big major like modern focused gaming channels are not going to be talking about these clearly. But within the vintage sphere, do you think that these games should be talked about more? Let's chat about it in the comments below, and while you're down there, smash that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. I make new gaming videos every Wednesday and Friday, and you may like my other and future work. Regardless of what you choose to do, thank you guys for giving me your time today. I really appreciate it, and I will see you guys in the next one.